Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to the real United States. And the fall is upon us. It's autumn now. Halloween is over, and we are entering the remainder of the fall holidays. And one of the things that's coming up here in the United States in about 4 weeks is going to be Thanksgiving. So you're going to see a lot of stuff related to pumpkins and squash and those sorts of fruits, vegetables. They are fruits, technically, because they're seed-bearing items. But you're going to see a lot of that here in posts in the United States. And the reason is that this is a staple that it dates back, well, basically to when this part of the world was discovered by Europeans. Pumpkins and their closely related cousins, if you will, squash, are actually indigenous to what is now called Central America or Mesoamerica and the Andes Mountains. So this was something that was discovered here in the Americas and then transplanted back to Europe and the rest of the world after the Age of Discovery. So I just wanted to take time here. I don't think a lot of people realize that a pumpkin and a squash, a winter squash at least, well, even a summer squash to some extent, are very closely related. They're essentially the same thing. The pumpkin, this little tiny one we got here, is these are all part of a family called Cucurbiceae, and the genus, for those of you that care, is Cucurbita. This is the Cucurbita pepo, P-E-P-O, is the most common pumpkin, and actually in some parts of the world, when it translates, squash are called pumpkins. I've seen this in videos from Japan, and I understand that in Australia and New Zealand that often these winter squash are called a pumpkin. Now this is a butternut squash, and it looks inside just exactly like what you'd think. The bulbous part is where the seeds are, just like the interior of a pumpkin, and I'm sure most of you have seen a pumpkin opened up. This is all solid. This neck portion is solid flesh. So there's a lot of consumable material in one of these. One of the issues I wanted to make was that these are, and this incidentally is the Cucurbita moschata, I believe is how it's pronounced, butternut squash. The reason all this came up is because through the ages, through the years, through the decades, through the centuries, marketers have used different terms in order to sell more of their product. The sweet potato here in the United States, a couple hundred years ago, they started marketing them as yams. Well, a sweet potato is not a yam. A yam is a very specific thing, Dioscorea, that matures above ground. Sweet potatoes obviously grow underground, much like a regular potato. Well, recently we encountered the fact that a particular cultivar, and that's like a subspecies, but in plants you call it a cultivar, of the butternut squash has been developed with this very long neck, a lot more flesh in each fruit. Well, these are being marketed as neck pumpkins. Now, if you're from Australia or New Zealand, that may seem perfectly reasonable because these are often referred to as some type of pumpkin. But here in the United States, that seems a little weird because that's obviously a squash. However, there isn't really a great deal of taste in a pie between these two items. Obviously, if you're going to cook it and serve it as a vegetable, yeah, there's a very distinct taste difference. This will often have well, it's just not as pleasant. Now, I know some of you are thinking, well, squash, I don't care for squash, so it's not pleasant to start with. Well, okay, that's fine. Taste is a personal thing. But in terms of a vegetable, this has a much more pleasant taste than just cooked pumpkin. But if you're making these into pies or pumpkin bread or confections or any other sort of combined dish, you will find absolutely zero difference in the dish if you use a pumpkin, a squash versus a pumpkin. or a neck pumpkin, as you may see them called. So if you're considering that, you may actually be able to get these somewhat cheaper, certainly for the amount of material, of flesh that you'll get out of the squash versus what you'll get out of a similar sized pumpkin, because the pumpkin is got this huge hollow area inside, and the hollow area inside of a squash much smaller in relation to the total size of the squash. So if you're going to make squash pie, nobody's going to notice. I promise you. You make two pies, one out of a squash, one out of a pumpkin, nobody's going to notice the difference if you use the same recipe. This is actually a little less watery. It contains a little less water. The easiest way to prepare these is to split them in half. Same thing with a pumpkin. Take the stem off, split them in half, get a cookie sheet of a baking tray, put some aluminum foil on the bottom, stick them upside down on there with the cut side down, bake them 350 for 30 minutes or an hour, whatever it takes, until they are done, until they are fork tender. You're going to get a lot more moisture coming out of this than you are out of this. So when you go to make a pie, this is going to give you a lot easier time in trying to give a consistency to your pie to bake that's going to be, well, pleasant. Pumpkin's a little harder to work with. You buy canned pumpkin, it's already been processed in a way to remove that moisture, that's fine. Nothing wrong with canned pumpkin. A lot cheaper to use a purchased pumpkin and spend a half hour baking it. Then it scoops right out of the rind. It's not difficult to do that way. It's not like having to, to peel it and boil it or anything. It takes the moisture out. It's very quick. It's very easy. Same thing with these. Split them in half, take the seeds out, put them on a piece of foil on a tray, and bake them. You're going to want a lip on that tray so that, because some moisture will come out, and you don't want that in the bottom of your oven because it caramelizes and it's really nasty to get out. I mean, I wouldn't know. I've never done. I don't clean ovens. But I can tell you, the lady standing behind the camera is not smiling about juice in the bottom of the oven caramelizing. So you can also do this with other squashes. The same thing. You're not really going to notice much difference. Some species, the New England cheese squash, which looks kind of like a pale pumpkin, I don't care much for the flavor of it. It can affect pies, but Hubbard squash or Queensland blue or buttercup or you name your cucurbita, and it's going to come out pretty much the same, assuming it's a ripe squash. Now, summer squashes, zucchini and yellow squash, are cucurbiceae as well. They are obviously a very different species, but they are part of this whole family of squashes. So, but I don't think you want to make pies out of those, and they don't come in this time of year, so they have absolutely nothing to do with what I'm talking about. So anyway, folks, when you're getting ready for your fall holidays and you want to whip up some pumpkin pies, and you can find squash, but pumpkins are expensive, use a squash. There's nothing wrong with that. It's going to taste perfectly fine. I guarantee it. I promise you. So, and these are going to come in this time, and these will keep better than a pumpkin. The squash, the butternut squash will keep. If you keep these in a relatively cool, dark, dry place, will keep for months and months and months. You'll still have these in March perfectly usable. We've had them well into when the spring flowers came out, and they were still fine. So you can get them this time of year very, very inexpensively because they are plentiful. I don't know if this means anything to any of you. Squash consumption here in the United States, about 350, 360 million pounds per year, which means that roughly every person, man, woman, and child in America consumes roughly 1 pound of squash per year by the last numbers I saw. So that's, I don't know, 2 cups or 3 cups of cooked squash maybe is about a pound. So it's not a real popular thing that people commonly eat all year long. It's available pretty much all year long here in the United States in our grocery stores. It's much more expensive if you buy it in the spring and summer, but it is always available. But the vast majority of people seem to gravitate to it towards in the fall holidays. It's traditional. It has those sort of flavors which we associate with the fall holidays. So, consider stocking up if you do like this, because it will keep for a very long time. Folks, I hope you had a wonderful Halloween. I thank you so much for joining us here on The Real United States. If you haven't already, I encourage you to pick subscribe. Come along for the adventure. We love having everybody with us. If you've got questions or comments, leave them in the comments section below. We try to get back to everybody we can. And as always, thank you for watching.